Good evening, everybody. We're meeting tonight with Hamza Walker, and Hamza has been a curator at the Renaissance Society in Chicago, sorry, Hamza, since the beginning of time. And I don't know how long it's been, but it seems to me that there's a oneness between Hamza and the Renaissance Society. And some time ago, and he'll tell us, I hope, in an international or poll, he was selected or chosen as one of the world's top curators. And, he's highly respected and has done a lot of things and has done a lot of writing and has done a lot of speaking. And tonight we get to pick his brain about how a curator functions. Now, Hamza, one of the things that I really like to do in having these discussions, because we're talking to a lot of artists in this group. Everybody almost is an artist. And, they all want to be more known and have more success for their art than they do. But I think that it's really interesting because when all of us were in high school, we were all insecure. We all had a vision of what we might do, but none of us really knew what we were going to do. Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Baltimore, Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. So I went to a hardcore engineering magnet school, public.
So you're the second art person to ever come out of Baltimore?
No. There's plenty. Baltimore's filled with wild children.
John Waters and who else? Just you. That's it.
John Waters. My feeling about John Waters is, those are documentaries.
Okay.
They are true in every sense. They're documentaries.
Baltimore is a really rich
those are
city.
filmed documentaries.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I bet you're right. All right. So were you interested in art in high school?
No, my best friend Dave Earl, he was sort of the key. My father was a musician, so I have a whole other kind of cultural patrimony. But Dave Earl, my best friend from high school, he was the one who would really drag, was up on the cultural tip in terms of visual arts. And so when I was 16, we used to joke about, what it would be we wanted to be Andy Warhol scholars. This is before Andy Warhol died, with the idea that could there be such a thing. So we would joke about that. And I have to credit him with a sort of, anything is possible, don't rule anything out. Despite the fact that we were being, had a very narrow kind of education. So, when I came to college, huh?
I don't know. I was going to ask what you meant by narrow, but let's skip to college if you like.
Engineering. I went to an engineering high school. Really, they were kind of providing a real vocational kind of background. I was supposed to be a civil engineer.
You didn't quite do that. Where did you go to college?
University of Chicago. And I came here thinking that I would be productive, go into chemistry or some such kind of thing. But it turns out that I enjoyed my art history classes. So that's what I went for.
So when did you graduate from the University of Chicago?
1988. And so,
then you went to work the next week at the Renaissance Society?
No. I worked for 3 years in a fundraising office for an arts and education organization, for Urban Gateways.
Okay.
And then I worked for the city for almost 5 years for the Department of Cultural Affairs. But in college, I think of myself as a child of the 80s. Insofar as all of the rhetoric by between 1984 and 1988, those were pretty heady times in terms of there'd been a decade between Douglas Crimp's picture show, a real paradigm shift, out of the 1960s. The 1980s as it had made inroads into the academy. So during my last year of college, I took Benjamin Buchlow's course on his seminar. And I don't know if you know Benjamin Buchlow.
I'm familiar with him.
Yeah. So he was here during, he was key in terms of turning me on to contemporary art, late 20th century, really, saying, get with the program,
So did you get a degree beyond your bachelor's degree?
No, I didn't. No.
Is that unusual for most curators these days?
Well, it depends. I mean, now there are lots of programs in visual studies, critical and visual studies, curatorial studies, the bar program, but none of that stuff was available. I mean, and I may have thought about doing something like that at the time, but I volunteered for a new music presenter right out of college, in addition to my day job as a secretary in a fundraising office. And then I went on to volunteer at Randolph Street Gallery. And I actually was the president of the board at the time of its closing. But I think my engagement, I was pretty headstrong in terms of, wanting to be involved with the immediate Chicago community, in the early 90s. And that was the real kind of education, I guess. But there was no real career path or anything like that at all in the early 90s and late 80s about how one becomes a curator. There are no curatorial studies programs or any of that kind of thing at all. And I was not interested in becoming a professor of art history and did not see myself in a museum. And having a father, he was a musician, I had no real background for what it meant to hold down, it's like the idea of being a lawyer, or I don't know, what a normal 9-to-5 would look like was just not in my purview. So I kind of backed my way into,
So how did the job at the Renaissance Society come about?
I worked for the city, for the Department of Cultural Affairs for 4.5 years in the public art program. And the position here had opened up. So my first...
Time out. Was there anybody in that position before you?
Yeah, Joe Scanlon.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. I had... I was the public art program. I was a public art coordinator, so I was responsible for administering the Percent for Art ordinance. So over 4 years, I pretty much, in terms of getting a real feeling for the geography of Chicago, the neighborhoods, all that stuff, and the arts community, I felt pretty, quite familiar with the local scene. And I had a wave of branch libraries that were being built. And my job was to pretty much, shepherd the Percent for Art ordinance through from beginning to end, to get the money, put together the panel, select an artist, work with the artist, select the site in these public libraries to hang the works. So those are my first real sort of professional curatorial outings, alongside my volunteer stuff at Randolph Street Gallery, which is an artist-run space, founded in the 1970s, like lots of other artist-run spaces. So then this position opened up, and I had asked Randy Alexander, who was a dealer in New York for a while. He was the director of development here. I asked him to be on a panel, and then he said, hey, this position at the Renaissance Society is open. I think you should apply. And so I went for it. I was actually planning to move to LA. I had no intention on staying in Chicago at that time. But yeah, just kept getting jobs, and so this job opened up.
So I want to interrupt for a moment and point out to the gang here that this is, there's a fair amount of serendipity, and that, as we talk about often, it's about an extension of relationships, and that, if you have good relationships, it's really likely that somebody's going to say to you, hey, I just found out about this. It doesn't quite fit me, but it seems like it's exactly right for you.
Yeah, it's about social capital. I mean, there's no, it's
Precisely.
not.
Good term.
Yeah, exactly. It's not people think it's all about what you know. In some sense, it's like before you realize that what you know is based on who you know in a lot of cases. You know, I mean, there's the old example of like, hey, Paul, I'm looking for a dry cleaner. Can you recommend one? Paul, I'm looking for somebody. I have a position to fill. Can you give me some names? Right? Yep. So it's really, that dimension cannot be overstated.
All right, well, let's segue to how you choose artists to exhibit, how you find artists. You know, you work with Suzanne Guez, and Suzanne's retiring, but, I mean, Suzanne, what's her title, director?
She's director.
And so what are the dynamics about who finds an artist, who sees somebody? A lot of your you do 5 exhibits a year. Historically, one exhibit tends to be a Chicago artist, correct, per year?
Yeah.
That's 20%, which is, I think, is a proper, appropriate number. But then, so you have to look in Chicago, and then you have to look at the whole rest of the world. How does all this mysterious stuff happen?
There's no calculus at all. I mean, if it is, it's an extremely irrational one. I mean, again, when I was mentioning the idea of, you know, the issue about like social capital, you know, who do you know? And I mean, capital sounds bad, but I do mean it because social capital is able to be, as a form of capital, can be converted into other kinds of capital. Hold on one sec, I just had a spill. I spilled some water. Let's wipe this off. Sorry about that.
Real life emergencies.
Yeah, I'm very clumsy. I'm on my desk with lots of books. So who are your colleagues that you trust in the field? And I would say one of the main sources of information are artists. So insofar as I talk to other colleagues who are curators, you know, and say, hey, what's going on? What are you seeing? What's interesting? What's going on over here? What's going on over there? And people are very generous with their, you know, I like the visual art. It's not, artists are extremely generous. I mean, you know, you're doing a studio visit, you have a show with somebody, you go, you're in LA, you're seeing, like, hey, what's going on? Let's have dinner. What's going on? Is there anybody here I should check out? And they say, you know, Katie is doing this stuff. She's got a studio 2 buildings over. You should really see what's going on. Really, really interesting kind of stuff. She's doing this whole family biography kind of thing. And then you take it from there, you know. So it's really a kind of extended grapevine, you know. Now, with the internet, I answer all the mail. If I open up, you know, I open up the mail and I see a list of names. Summertime, a lot of people do their group shows. I look at a list, and if I see a list of names, none of whom I'm familiar with, I now have this thing called the internet at my disposal. So let's just go online and see what all is going on, you know, and check stuff out. So you were mentioning serendipity. So some part grapevine, some part serendipity, getting out of my own backyard, traveling, but talking to people.
Do you try and balance the media you show? I mean, you're not going to do 5 video, but you're not going to do 5 photography shows in a year. You're not going to do 5 sculpture shows.
You want counterpoint, but at the same time, you could also, for points of compare and contrast, you can do 2 photo shows back to back, right? And that might be interesting. Or you can turn around and do, you know, counterpoint is a key, you know, it's a very powerful tool. So, you know, but in terms of paying attention in some kind of global sense, not at all. I mean, you know, it's all mixed up. Everything's everything. Painting, video, photography, I don't care. You know.
I feel like the Renaissance Society shows a lot of artists I've never heard of yet. You know, and yet being the operative term there. And that sometime after they show up at the Renaissance Society, I end up hearing about them much more often in much larger and larger contexts. I mean, frequently you're giving artists their first American show, aren't you?
Yeah, in terms of being, you know, hearing about them stateside, that might be the case. But they can be senior figures who are, you know, national figures in their country of origin and, you know, may not have gotten any play at all in the United States or let alone the Midwest, you know. But they're not, that not to say that, you know, are these people nobody has ever heard of before, or something like that. It's like, oh no. In a lot of cases, they are significant figures. We may not have heard of them before, but
or you, Paul.
they're quite well known where they come from, or in Europe, or in Asia. But that's becoming less. I mean, now I would say the idea of contemporary art and some kind of rush to being a premier or being a first with this, that, and the other. That now, it's a big world. Stuff is going on all over the place or whatever, and that's great. And I would just say it's like that chapter or phase or moment in as the source of pride or reputation is over.
So how big a reputation do the least accomplished artists have that you show?
Oh my God. And I think about, Michelle Walanga or Kara Walker had shown, she was all of 26 when she showed here, but she had shown at the Drawing Center. Where else was she? She had a couple shows, but was young. But it certainly wasn't, no catalog, no publications, no, none of that stuff. So it can go from, it ain't about credentials or anything like that. I mean, you can go from zero. I don't care about that stuff at all. It is interesting how certain, when I think about, it's like painters are very interesting. It's funny. I wouldn't think about that question in a general sense, but it's only something as specific as like painting that makes me think about that question. So it's like being a 25-year-old painter, who can hold down 3,200 square feet, like the body of work that's needed for a certain girth of show in relationship to something like painting in terms of how long it takes to develop as a painter.
You're talking about 18 paintings probably to hold that space.
Well, right, exactly. We're looking at about, to have a decent survey, we're talking about 22, somewhere between, depending on the scale and everything, but it's like, it's a very tough, but it's funny, but you can definitely, with painting, I would say that's the only place where you can actually put it kind of on an age axis in a sense, right? Whereas as a medium, it's very interesting to say, in the gallery and commercial world, usually takes care of it in terms of giving it shows and blah, 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 blah. So it's very rare to show like a painter at age X.
Right.
That's really, really
rare. X is a small number.
Exactly. Right. You're usually older, because usually if you're a younger painter, you would have hit it. You've had commercial shows, commercial success, gallery shows, blah, 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 blah. The work develops, blah, blah, blah. But you don't, which is a very, very funny aspect of the medium, if I were to look at it. That's a very particular thing, I think.
That's interesting. All right, let's open this up to some questions from you guys out there in a moment. So start thinking about the questions you have. How can you does Suzanne as director participate in the curatorial decisions?
Oh yeah, sure. I didn't do shows until my first show was 2001, I think, maybe 2000. I can't remember. 2000, 2001. But what's interesting, my title is Director of Education, Associate Curator. Before, although I was doing shows at Randolph Street Gallery, for example, curating shows, and I did, Simp Art, at the Hyde Park Art Center, the Scaffold, for example, right? So plenty of activity. But my first 5, 6, 7 years here, she would pick the artist, but then I would write about them, right? So I would frame the argument. So there was a very clear division of labor between, her in terms of selection of artists. She's not a writer, and I enjoyed that as an art historian. So it's a very, and I would say that and I didn't realize, and I'm sure nor did she, how beautiful that kind of symbiotic relationship is, and how rare it actually is.
Right.
So people who are in curatorial studies programs, I feel like it's like, you know what? If you did an internship or something and you worked at a museum, just to sit there and go, it's like, okay, X is going to choose an artist, and you don't know what it's going to be, but then you have to write about it and frame the argument, right? So you don't get to choose.
Sounds like a drinking game.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. But you have to make the argument. So Heimo Zobernig, right? Shazia Sikander, Luke Toyman, Diana Thader, right? So just throwing you like Christina Iglesias, like all kinds of different. You don't know where it's going to come from, right? But you have to then write about it. So that was I like that game.
That's difficult and challenging. Anne, do you have a question or a comment? Go ahead, Anne. I've unmuted you, but I tried to get you last time and I couldn't hear you. Can you talk now? Can we hear you? I don't hear you, Anne.
I see you.
If you'd like, type the question in the chat box below, and I'll ask Hamza. All right, I'm going to move on. And if you have a question, type it to me or something, okay? Does somebody else have a question right now? I got more, but I'd like to hear yours. If you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and fire. Anna, go ahead. Wait, I'm going to unmute you. All right, Anna, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
What is the focus of your exhibits there? I'm outside of Chicago, and I'm just interested in what the focus is.
We do 5 artists, 5 exhibitions per year, group shows, monographic exhibitions. We commission a lot of new work, contemporary, all living artists. There's no artist lead we follow. There's no focus per se. So
is there a mission statement for the Renaissance Society?
To support developments in the contemporary visual arts, period.
Wow.
That's it.
That's pretty broad. How cool.
It's very lean. It's subject to interpretation.
Huh.
So.
Okay, thanks.
How do you feel about having a new director to work with? Is that Suzanne's going to be, you're going to have somebody else by September, or is she going to stick around a while?
She will be leaving in January.
And you hope to have a replacement by then, and I'm gathering that it's not necessarily you.
We don't know.
So you are interested?
Yes, but we have no idea.
Who be we? Who's making this decision? Who chooses?
The board of directors. Search committee.
Do you have a contract that says you're there for a certain period? I mean, I think everybody's really thrilled and happy with you, but I mean, do you have a contract for a length of time, or is it just open-ended?
No, there's no contract.
How?
For 40th.
I know, she's been there 40 years and has done it. Everybody loves Suzanne, and she's fabulous and has done a great job, and I can't imagine she's ever going to leave, really.
So with 40th, it's like, no, it doesn't operate on the contract, first of all.
No, I was talking about you, though, but you don't have a contract either.
I would argue the ethos of the place when you have somebody who's been here for 40 years, it just doesn't, that's not the, I've been here for 18, Lori's been here for 16, 17, everybody's been here for a long time.
And you guys are still all innovative. That's pretty good. How far ahead do you plan exhibits? Is all the 2012, 2013?
2 years in advance, a year in advance, 2 years at most, but you leave some slots empty, stuff comes up suddenly, and you want to be able to respond to things.
Right.
Instead of, you don't just want to, I mean, some beautiful things, be able to come up to somebody and say, to an artist is like, yeah, let's do a show. How about October? And they're like, no shit. Yeah, really? Yeah. October, let's do it now. You know, as opposed to we think in some sense it's like, oh my God, and everything takes so long. It's like, you know what? No, not, you know. In other cases, you commission new work, and it could be 5 years, it could be 4 years. You're working with an artist, and it's like, well, I have an idea, it doesn't go through. Well, let's keep on. You know, we're there. Whenever you're ready, we'll drop it in. You know.
That's cool. Gosha, do you have a question?
Oh, hi, Hamza. How are you?
Hey, Gosha.
Hi. What is your next project you're working on?
What's the next project?
Uh-huh.
Well, exhibition, Don Vo.
Uh-huh.
Rebecca Quaitman, R.H. Quaitman, painter from New York. Don Vo will have some pieces of the Statue of Liberty project. We'll have some of those things. Working on a group show about finitude. So I've just been, I need a whale skeleton. Lucy Skyer, the Lucy Skyer piece. She's on board. Paris Epimananda and Daniel Gustav Kramer. Daniel Gustav Kramer. They're a couple very beautiful piece in Documenta. But it's a group show with about 6 artists dealing with it's my version of an ecology show. I don't like ecology shows very much. So I've been sitting with one for a couple of years trying to figure out why. I mean, I tend to be kind of reactionary in terms of generating themes for group shows. You know, usually I see a show and I go, oh, I don't like that. And then I ask myself, why? And then I think, well, if you don't like it, what would a good version of that be? Like, why don't you engage with it in that way? So that's usually my MO. So this is my take on ecology shows. So yeah, about 6 artists for that show. So that's it for next year. I've got some stuff on the back burner that I can't announce yet. But.
Great, sounds wonderful.
Does the market make any difference to you?
No, not really. I mean, it's quite phenomenal as a force. I mean, I've never felt more. I think that the discrepancy between the critical, academic, curatorial, scholarly side of things and the market are incredibly out of sync with one another. Whereas I would say before there used to be some kind of vague concordance, you know, so we could all agree. In some vague sense, it's like, okay, Gerhard Richter is worth $1 million. You know, he's the greatest living painter or whatever. Whereas I think the amount of money that's kind of been parsed inside of the art world has made it so that the kind of commercial values for work and the kind of critical value that's accorded to work are not in sync at all. You know, which is quite an interesting moment. You know, that's not, there's no value judgment about that at all. You know, even though it could be the source of as much value judgment as any other, but I prefer to look at it just as, you know, good, bad fact of life. Like, this is a fact of life.
How much of the work that you exhibit is available for sale?
We don't sell anything. I mean,
I know that. How much of the work that you exhibit is available for sale?
Oh God, I mean, I can't. There's no percentage. There's no. I mean, I couldn't even begin to answer it.
How often do the board of directors talk to you about, should I buy this?
A blue moon would be a lot.
Okay. So next to never.
Next to never. I mean, I'm too young to have those kinds of war stories, you know, but always hearing them and joking, like, it's like, oh my God, back in the day, I could have told you to buy this, that, or the other, and where is it now kind of thing. But we don't collect or anything like that. So in terms of letting that go, and like you said, if they're people you've never heard of before, you know, there's no...
Yeah, but you guys have a good track record of being prescient.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to do something crazy and you went ahead and decided, like, okay, I'm just going to purchase something from every show that you guys do or something, watch it and do that. It's like, you stand a chance of making out all right.
I would think so.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think in a lot of museums, the board meddles. And, I mean, let's take a look at MoCA in LA at the moment. And I think that the board's meddling has something to do with Paul Schimmel's. It's unclear whether he was fired or at that rate, you know, elevation, you know, just left. But, you know, and Eli Broad, I think, is reputed to meddle as a significant board member who bailed out the museum. And I think there's other situations. I mean, I think that before Madeline Grinstein got to be director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, the notion was that the board ran the place. And I remember people saying, I don't know why they hired her. They're not going to be able to steer her around. So I guess I'm alluding to that, but what you're telling me is it doesn't happen at the Rand.
No. I mean, we have a completely different board. I mean, our board, it sounds really like all shucks down home and Midwestern. Just it's like they're really nice folks, you know, in a way, and they aren't. There's no. I mean, we have people who collect, and we're supported by the same people who support the Art Institute and the MCA. It's a small community, and you know that. But it's in terms of it doesn't have any of those. Yeah, the bulk of our board they're not collectors in any serious major sense, you know, of that order. I mean, you know, Don and Howard or Lou Manilow, and they're on our advisory board. But, you know, whenever I hear about that, I always think of that as like, it's as though the history of museums is completely forgotten. It's as though there's an imaginary golden moment of the museum. It's like, how do you think a public cultural trust is built?
Wait a minute, why don't you answer that?
The city's native-born elite get together and decide to give their holdings to create a public cultural trust. It's like they are the determining agents and entities. I mean, so the idea of the gentleman curator, and so I think we want to retroactively have a very romantic notion of a academic or an understanding of the scholarly and academic importance of those artifacts of human cultural achievement as existing outside of those interests. Whereas, no, those interests are in fact responsible for founding the museum, and this golden period where that wasn't the case doesn't exist. It's like that's how the museum was founded. So it just often sounds very, very naive. Oh my God, the board of trustees was meddling in the thing. It's like, well, goddamn it, those are the people who founded the joint. You know, like, what do you think is going on? When was this period where they did not meddle? Right? I want you to show me the museum that is a model of civil service. It's like, yes, I got my job through a civil service entrance exam. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that. So I think in terms of, you know, recognizing those kinds of forces, not that we have per se, you know, but those are the inner machinations of museums and those kinds of politics. You know, that stuff is there, you know. So people are shocked by some kind of scandal or something like that or what goes down. You know, and that's not to say that I'm cynical, but.
No, I don't think that's cynicism, actually. I think maybe the other way. Maybe I'm the one who's, as you define it, more cynical. And I gotta reflect on that.
Like, and if you're it's like more cynical, I think it's like get with a realpolitik of the whole situation. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you want that collection and you don't want it to go scurrying off to the Cleveland Museum of Art or to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it's like, you better, you know, put on your Negro best, get out there, socialize, be nice to those people, and court them and see if they will give that collection to your museum. You want to keep it, work it. So that kind of, you know, like, no mystery there.
Fair enough. Somebody else have a question? Let me see if we've got some hands up here. I don't see that many. Somebody want to unmute themselves? Lynn, go right ahead.
Did you unmute me?
I did.
Hamza, I think of you as a very global curator, and I
I just have a question about regionalism. Like, where do you think that fits in? I'm thinking about like the LA. I forget what they were called. The shows all over LA last winter and fall.
Oh yeah, Pacific Standard Time.
Yeah, Pacific Standard.
Oh yeah.
I saw that and it was so exciting to see the work in that light. And maybe it was the complete hawk, but how do you think about that? And I know your institution might not have a role, but yeah, I mean, what do you?
I thought it was fabulous. I mean, I to the point. Okay, once I got over being intimidated by it, right? So, how long were you there? Now, how long were you there?
Not long, 5 days, and I caught the very end. So luckily, half of the stuff was closed when I went.
Right. I couldn't. I mean, it's the kind of event where it's like, wait a minute, I need 2 weeks to be here in LA with just this as the agenda to deal with LA plays itself to itself. So it's like, but a really wonderful undertaking, I think, in terms of the Getty, you know, the nation's. So it's interesting when we think about writers, right? Like to say a national literature, and we can't think about like a national literature. I don't think without thinking about like Flannery O'Connor. It's like she's a Southern writer. It's like, oh yeah, Dashiell Hammett. It's like that's West Coast. It's like, oh yeah, Baldwin. That's a New York East Coast one, right? Willa Cather. Like so, you get into this whole. And it's interesting about a national art, but I would say again that breaks down pretty fast into regions and pockets. Right, but the emergence of Los Angeles is a, latter 20th century. It's like a, it's not that. It's a very short story, but a very robust story. So I think that the bid to sort of like it's like no. This is one of the main tributaries to that Nile, known as the nation's art history in the 20th century, and don't you forget it. Yeah. So I think that kind of doing it right with a level of scholarship and a level of self-consciousness and a real, it was really, really quite wonderful, albeit intimidating. Now, I don't know if that would be, it's like this Philly or New York or none of those things. I don't think the East Coast needs to do anything of that sort. Chicago would be kind of interesting to try and think about what would a version of Pacific Standard Time look like.
Yeah, I kept thinking about that, and I don't think it would look as good, and that sort of bothers me.
Right, yeah. But it would be, but it would be an interesting pursuit to talk about the different moments, periods, and chapters. I mean, even if it didn't look as good, but I think just to do it by virtue of the fact that we don't know what it would look like, might make it an interesting endeavor.
I'd love to see it. If you want to orchestrate it, I'm on your side.
Yeah, but I don't think. But I think that chapter. Lynn, you were talking about regionalism, and Paul, you participated on the panel that I organized about that idea of a Chicago artist. Yep. That really doesn't exist anymore.
What doesn't?
The notion of a Chicago artist.
I think it definitely does. I think Chicago brands their artists, and even if you're an expatriate Chicago artist, you're still a Chicago artist.
Yeah, I think the twilight of that. I think that's had its twilight.
I guess it's time to have another panel, huh?
Yeah, right, yeah. But I think that there's no more stylistically, and in terms of the way that the school works, the school system, younger artists coming here, how long they stay, they might leave, that the way that Chicago participates in a larger kind of narrative is very, very different. Younger artists are a lot more mobile. I mean, they come here, they get their MFA, they may stick around, contribute a thing or two, or maybe not, and decide that they're going to head to the coast. Mm-hmm. And it without becoming necessarily like Chicago artists or something along those lines. And even if they do stick around, I don't think there are any kind of stylistic markers or tendencies that would define them as being a Chicago artist. I
don't think there's a style per se, but I think there's a work ethic that Chicago brands on all its people, including its artists.
Really? Yeah, I guess I don't. Yeah, I guess I don't see that as a defining trait of the region.
Okay, I think I do, but you know,
Okay.
we can put on boxing gloves later. I think Sarah Jo had a question. Sarah Jo, take it away.
Hi. Yeah, I was trying to formulate a question actually, but mostly I'm here in Los Angeles and I've lived in California my whole life. So for me, Pacific Standard Time was fascinating because it was a lot of, it kind of was pulling things together that were in the air, and a lot of which, it relates a little bit to the whole thing going on at MoCA and what you were talking about before. Both you and Paul were talking about in terms of the roles of museums or cultural institutions, maybe we'll put it that way, and the people who are doing really interesting kind of unexpected shows, or versus things that are kind of needing to be blockbusters or needing to be, this is a sure hit kind of thing. And I mean, that was kind of what was wonderful about Pacific Standard Time is it was sort of like watching my life, that all the influences that I grew up with, that, I mean, the other thing about California too, it's a place that so many people came to, especially after World War II, full of all sorts of immigrants from all over the world. In both, it's a big state, so there was what was happening in the north and in the south. So that was it was wonderful to see. It was overwhelming. I couldn't get to everything, but I went to as much. So I just hope that kind of thing is able to continue, because partly I think it's this reevaluation that we do as time passes of what's important, what influence something had that you don't think about until later.
Yeah, I completely. I mean, but there are certain. I think that there's a dimension of Pacific Standard Time that transcended the regionalist dimension. I mean, for me, now dig this. The chapter that was the hammer. That was so good. That was so good.
I love that show. That was a great show.
It just spoke, and I felt like it's like the cast of characters. And this has specifically to do with, I think, the circulation of Black artists circa 1960s and the 1970s, right? So you got David Hammond's there for a while, Carrie James Marshall's there, but everybody is there for a minute, right, and doing stuff. Charles White is holding down the fort, but then everybody moves. Then they go to New York. It's like, so there's a kind of I don't know, ebb and flow feeling. But I felt like, and that was specific to Now Dig This, where I felt like, wait, that story, it's like, yeah, you can talk about Black California at that particular moment, but that's a much more, it was going on there, but what would happen there, and then the sort of flow of people out makes that a much bigger story. But yeah, just a great show. Yeah.
Can you talk about, digressing perhaps, what's the difference in the role of a curator and an art dealer?
An art dealer as, somebody whose interest is commercial in terms of selling work, where I would say the role of a curator, scholar, and not to say that what an art dealer does doesn't have, curatorial dimension. There is a large, there is an overlap, but in terms of certain concerns about a type of work or a kind of work being commercially driven as opposed to academic or scholarly concerns, those are two different kettle of fish. Now, to say something, if I were to take that question and to map it onto a different phenomenon, it's like, now going to see the Fontana show at Gagosian, or the Picasso show at Gagosian, or the de Kooning show. This is from several years ago, Gagosian. But the idea that Gagosian is putting on museum quality shows makes it so it might be harder to tell the difference.
Yeah, but one senses that he's putting on museum quality shows for commercial reasons.
Yeah, I mean, there might be any number of things, but I mean, in the end, in terms of access to work, which museums may or may not have access to in terms of organizing it, or, I mean, they're still quite amazing undertakings.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt about it.
I mean, this is one, this guy, Craig Starr Gallery in New York. It's so funny, I ordered their catalog. They just had an early Robert Morris drawing show up, and they now have a Robert Rauschenberg North African collages show that just opened. And I just think those little shows that they do are so smart and scholarly, and really, so that's not to say that what, in terms of that overlap, there can be quite a bit, and also to look at somebody like Richard Flood, right? So, Richard Flood, when he worked for, who did Richard Flood work for? Barbara Gladstone, right? And then he went to the Walker Art Center, right? Or somebody like Paz Cortez, for example, who had, and it really, in that case, like, that doesn't really matter at all. These people are passionate and they know their shit. I mean, and in the end, they just love art. And they don't give a shit whether they're working it this way or working it that way. They want to do shows, there's a space, whether it's commercial, whether it's a museum. They just love art, period. So I think about figures like that, and it's like, no, those lines, they can be blurred, in a productive fashion.
That's interesting, because I would have, except for all those examples you gave, I would have argued that there's not that much movement from the commercial to the museum curatorial world.
No.
Make a lot of good examples.
You can go back and forth. I mean, and like that stuff can be old school. Like there's plenty, because it's about knowledge. Who knows what? Who has the budget to travel, go see what in and out of those studios? Who has a passion for it? So. I mean, if we wanted to construct some kind of rigid firewall and those kinds of things, but I mean, the cat who worked for Carol, he just did the last Whitney Biennial with
brain dead.
He works for Carol Green at Green Naphtali. Okay. He was the director there, but he just did the last Whitney. And so, there's movement.
Yeah, you're right. Wait a minute, somebody had a question. Tara, go ahead. Wait a minute, I got to unmute you. But I meant go ahead. Now you can do it.
I see the difference between what you do and gallery shows. Do people ever approach you to buy some of this stuff, and do you connect them with the artists?
Depends. I mean, some of the artists we work with are represented, by a dealer. So if they're interested in something, we just say, call the dealer to see if that's available. Or in some cases, we'll know. It's like, oh, yeah, that piece, I don't think anybody owns that piece. If you're interested in it, call the dealer. Or if they aren't, it's like, yeah, talk to the artist directly.
You get a kickback when somebody buys something?
No kickback. No, nothing.
Never, ever?
Never, ever. No percentage, no nothing. Not at all.
You know the story about Michelle Grabner and a Luke Toyman's painting?
I know. I saw that show.
They sold the Toyman's painting, and he gave them a big gift.
Yeah, but that's Luke. I mean, Luke is super generous, and that's very beautiful. And
exactly.
The person who got it was way to go.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
I have a pet peeve that I don't think you're guilty of, which is interesting since you're the director of education. But I find it annoying when curators are trying to establish or prove their point of view and use the artwork in a didactic manner that isn't anywhere near what the artist might have intended.
I'm not, I think it's beautiful to be able to create different contexts for work. And I love going to see a piece in one show and looking at it and going, oh my God, I would never have thought of that work in that context. It's like,
okay.
and you
Yeah,
know,
but that's enlightening. That's not confining.
right, exactly. That's not confining at all. But so I think of that as the good example of a tendency that you're saying, right? So it isn't. It's like, and then there are those examples where work can be Bowdlerized in a sense, or put in a context where I would say it's like, whoa, wait a minute, I don't think that you know, I might want to think about that. But that's all part of the game.
Okay. What kind of
But artists tend to be very generous, I would say, in terms of like, it's like, no, it can work like this, or it can work like that, you know. And
Sure.
so there isn't a hard and fast, like, this is right and that is wrong, right?
To what extent, I'm changing gears, to what extent do artists participate in the installation of their work at the Renaissance Society?
It varies, but they're given the right of first refusal.
What do you mean by that? They get to determine where stuff goes to an extent?
Yeah, we work together on things. I mean, in their input, it's like they lead, we follow, right? And we become equal shareholders. So if they want to do something, and we always say, it's like, what do you think? You know, I put in, work on me, Van Kerkhoven. On me, what do you think of this? And she goes, yeah, I like it. She does something. She goes, I was thinking this, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'll put something up. She goes, nah, I don't think that's right. So it's a dialogue, back and forth. In some cases, the artists say, they say, I do not want to hang the show. There's a division of labor. So that's your job.
No,
right?
definitely. But you would relinquish ultimate control to the artist if the artist so desired.
Yeah, I would. And sometimes you just have to. There is a rule: stand down. It's just like stand down. And
For you to stand down.
I'll stand down. If somebody wants to do something, I might not like it, and if they insist, it's like, that's cool. You get it. The ball is yours. And then there are times when it's like you stand down and you go, I'll be damned. Now I understand why I wouldn't have done that. But now I see that they made a much bolder move with their work than I would ever have made, right? So it's about trust, right? And there are those creators who have the trust and faith in artists and those who don't, right? And then sometimes, like, shit can get whacked out of control, but the thing is, like, check this shit out. That's good. Like, don't faith. It's just about having faith.
Okay. My sense is that you have pretty eclectic, broad taste, aesthetically, you, Hamza, as an individual. You think?
Yes.
And I don't feel like you're trying to push your taste particularly, but you're not trying to ignore it either. I want to know, what kind of art do you particularly like? And let's start with there, and then I have a follow-up.
I like it all. I mean, I don't think that there's any, the second that I find myself categorically, that's when I become interested in something. To say, oh, I don't like this, it's like, wait, no, you haven't seen a good one, right? Or as far as a style of work or kind of work, but there's no, and it really is, it's like, in a sense that, what's your favorite color? Something like, no, all colors are good, like, in a way. Or what it's like, food-wise, it's like, nah, everything. Everything's got, it's like, cooking, getting out there. It's not, there's no real.
So my follow-up question was going to be, how does the restraint of what you personally like impact the Renaissance Society? And the fact of the matter is that there is a certain oneness or universality in your taste and what gets exhibited at the Renaissance Society.
Exactly. I definitely don't believe in a certain, if you were to say, it's like, can I do a show that you like? Am I interested in doing it? It's like, what would Paul like to see? What would the public? Who the fuck is the public? It's like, it's not, I can't do that. And I'm not interested in doing that. I can tell you what I really am passionate about, and I want to share what I'm passionate about with you. And I make it my business to try and be informed about that which I'm passionate about. That's the best that I can do.
Are you guys picking up on this? There's a recurring mantra from Chris Mao, who has a gallery in Beijing and in New York, who says he doesn't play to the market, he plays to what he likes and then tries to share his enthusiasm, which is the same thing that Hamza Walker is saying, which is the same thing Molly Barnes said previously. You know, and it's the same thing. Advice that I would give each of you as artists is don't try and pick a trend, don't try and play into a trend. Try more and more to be yourself, which is I think what Hamza's doing, or being empirical about, and go with that, and then promote yourself and get it out there so that there's a greater audience for it. Concur?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I can't. Yeah. I mean, what does somebody else want to hear? I can't second guess. But how do you grow? How do you learn? To realize, what are those things? To pay attention to the things that you don't like. I mean, you don't wear all your favorite clothes at the same time. You don't wear it's like, what do you? How do you?
Cool,
Keep staying curious about things, and I think that's really, really kind of important. So that you can be. Can you exercise some level of objectivity? It's like, in this business, what is that in a certain sense? But I want to say, yeah, I can, insofar as I want to, the range of kinds of work and ways of engaging with things, to be open to all of those things.
Perfect. Alan, you have a question? Take it away.
Oh, I forgot what it was.
No way, you forgot. All right, well then maybe we should wrap this up.
Oh, no, I remember.
Oh, good.
You might have mentioned this. I'm watching my son tonight, so I've been a little distracted. Is there a way to submit to group shows, or is there any submission process for?
No. I mean, no. This is so funny. It used to be the internet is a very funny thing. We used to get slides, and then slides became CD-ROMs and things in the mail, and now it's really weird. I mean, we get cards for shows, and on occasion, a notice to check out people's websites. But it's weird. I often wonder, if you're an artist and you have a website, like, you build this website, but then how do you promote it? How do you put it out there? It used to be you had to make slides and you had to send them to a specific person. Like, it really had to have this like real directness to it, kind of. And a one-to-one thing. And now that's gone, and information is just so much more amorphous in general and just there, right? But there's no submission process per se. But people send links. You can send me a link to your website to check things out. People still send. I got a CD-ROM, I think, like 6 months ago. But those have been coming down to like the single digits in terms of the number of them that arrive in the mail. But pretty much just checking out websites. And I usually have 4 or 5 ideas for shows going on, and I'm just looking, And I do look, no matter how belatedly, I do look.
Cool. What's your email address?
You ready? Mandrake, MANDRAKE @uchicago.edu.
Wait a minute. I didn't know that one.
You have that one. That's the same one.
Okay.
Mandrake, MANDRAKE @uchicago.edu.
Okay, cool. Andrea, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One question, and I just wanted to say I have a father who is a jazz musician too. I grew up in a musical upbringing, and then went to the Art Institute of Chicago, then moved away from Chicago. On the East Coast now. But my question is, I have a solo exhibition that is in the works for coming up in 2014 with a curator, and at a museum, the Science Museum here in the United States. And the curator wants to work on having it as a traveling exhibition. So I'm wondering if you have any quick sort of nuts and bolts suggestions as to how the curator, or if I can participate actually as an artist in creating a traveling exhibition. So she already has museums that she's talking to, but it will start at the Plains Museum. They have funding then to make it into a traveling exhibition.
Traveling shows is really, it's really, really, really hard. All at the level at which the show it's usually, for us, if a show travels, and I mean, I've had actually I've had a few shows travel. And it involves a very, in those cases where we did the show was done, it was for here, and then it was like, okay, let's try and package this and send it out and see if there's any interest, greater interest. It was a very pointed kind of shotgun blast. So I put together a list of, 10 or 15 institutions where I had like-minded colleagues who would take a look at it, who would really entertain the proposal. So instead of just doing a general, email blast or whatever, or not email, but putting together 100 packets and sending them out, I was very, very select in who I sent it out to, thinking it's like, oh yeah, I know so-and-so, they might appreciate this work or whatever. So it was really based on a kind of grapevine of colleagues that I have in terms of putting things out. I mean, outside of that, in another way, it was based on the kind of convenience, economy, and sex appeal of another show, the video show.
But that's really surprising. I get the feeling mostly you don't try to travel exhibits very much. Is that correct?
No, we would travel them all if we could. It takes a lot of manpower to travel a show, right? To get the loans, to get it out there, to package it up.
Yeah, but you guys have got a really sexy reputation and a really good, people think incredibly highly of the Renaissance Society and of you. You'd almost think that certain institutions would say, yeah, gimme, gimme.
Yeah, then they have. I've traveled show. I've got a not bad hit rate for traveling shows, that I've done.
It's interesting with the Museum of Contemporary Art. Like the Jim Nutt show was really wonderful, and it didn't travel anywhere. And the Rashid Johnson show that's up now is traveling to a lot of excellent institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
it depends. Some things there's a zeitgeist and a moment for it, and boom, a lot of people want to get on board. It's like in other things you realize, like, yeah, I did that show 10 years ago, somebody else does it 10 years later, and then everybody wants to travel the show then, that kind of thing. And so, for example, the Paul Tech show, right? Paul Tech show in Europe, incredibly beautiful. No takers in the United States. 10 years later, United States show. So that kind of thing. But it's really, really, really hard. But I would just say, the very pointed shotgun blast approach seems to work. But it's a lot of work to package it.
Yeah.
Andrea, are you trying to talk about your role in helping make that happen?
Yeah, if that's acceptable. I can be a little vocal, and yeah. So is it copacetic to have an artist sort of work with the curator on that, or I don't know if that's for money. The second question, that's the one question that I have, just sort of a follow-up question to that.
I think it's totally copacetic. That's a slang word, by the way. I think it's totally cool.
Who invented it?
Was it you?
No.
John Copeland. I don't know who.
No, but I almost want to say it's like give away. I don't know. It's like to somebody who can answer this question, they will win a couple of Renaissance Society publications.
So what's the answer?
I think Dizzy Gillespie.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Dizzy Gillespie who did Copacetic.
Yeah. Okay.
It's Andrea. It's your career, and you have a right to do what's good for your career. And museums and curators and dealers who don't concur are wrong.
My follow-up question to that was with the Renaissance Society, which is a very, I'd say, singular, in my estimation, a singular institution coming out of a university, research university. What are your sort of sister institutions, museums around the United States and internationally? Do you consider sort of like organizations?
The ICA Boston, ICA Philadelphia, the Hammer Museum. In some sense, we've worked with all of them at once, either traveling shows or something like that. But we are strange. Being a university gallery on the one hand, so we can play that card, in some sense, even though we're an affiliate organization. But in Europe, the Kunsthal Basel, the whole system of Kunsthal is around Europe. the Wit de Wit in Rotterdam. There are a whole series of frocks. The frock is the French contemporary art system, which is very interesting. In Italy, I don't know when I think about Europe. But it isn't, it's funny, it isn't so, like the institutions, because if you were to look at like there are sister institutions, but it actually comes down more to individuals with who we share a certain simpatico with.
Right, right. Yeah.
So with like, you know, Christine Van Asch at the Pompidou, you know, we've produced a work together. The Raymond Pettibone show that was here also went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art when Ann Temkin was there.
Yeah.
Right. So the Felix Gonzalez Torres show went to the Hirshhorn, it went to us, then it went out to, I think, LA Mocha, right? So it's more the idea that we were included, you know, we collaborate with the Art Institute, James Rondeau is there. So we have colleagues in contemporary art departments that are in encyclopedic museums that share an interest. So that often ends up being a lot more a kind of a network in a way, rather than peer-to-peer organizations, which is very, very funny in terms of who we find ourselves collaborating with.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Good comments. Thank you. Anybody else have something to say? I think we're done. Hamza, I'm out of questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes. I don't have any more here. I think this has been really informative. You know, I mean, a lot of what this course is about is demystifying the art world, and I think having someone be as forthcoming as you have and sharing information is really beneficial. And I think, you know, there's a tendency, I don't know how much you encounter it, there's a tendency on artists' parts to put curators and dealers and museum directors on pedestals and to not think of them as human beings, and that they have foibles and they have strength and they have, you know, certain proclivities and desires, etc. And I think, you know, you disabuse us of that, and, you know, you can be a laudatory figure while being a genuine human being, and I really appreciate you being so generous with us.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let me unmute all these folks, and they can all say thank you with me in unison. Hamza, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hamza.
Awesome. Great.
All right, everybody. Good night. I will see you next week, Hamza. Thanks so much. Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.